Hey everyone, I'm Glenn. I'm the founder of ProdSense, a company that helps organizations with product strategy. I've been in tech for a while, and I've worked in both big tech companies like Microsoft and startups like Auth0. I started off my career as a software engineer, and then I moved into product for the past 15 years. I love to help people solve problems with technology, and I also care a lot about making tech a more equitable place. Today I'm going to be talking to you about my favorite tool, ChatGPT. Now, throughout the day, you're going to be learning a lot more about it. I'm going to give you an overview, and I'm going to focus on some of my favorite features and the cool things I've been experimenting with. I've been using ChatGPT a lot over the last few months and seeing what I can do with it. And one of the things I really love about it is the conversational AI aspect. It's almost like talking to a person. You can go back and forth, adding additional context, and your answers get more and more refined. And with practice, I've found that you can get ChatGPT to get you the answers that you're looking for. And I'm going to show you how. So to get started, I thought, let's just jump in and ask ChatGPT to tell us about itself. So as we get started, I thought the easiest way to see what ChatGPT is to have the tool tell you itself. So just say hi, and what you're looking at here is the ChatGPT UI, where you can just type questions and have these ongoing conversations. And you'll notice over here on the left, these are all the different conversations that I've had. As I said, I've been using it a lot. I probably have hundreds of conversations here. So the first question I'm going to ask ChatGPT is, hi, tell me about yourself. And so we can see that it's introducing itself. It's describing itself as this language model from OpenAI, and it's talking about its purpose. Now, one of the things you'll notice as you start to work with ChatGPT is it can get very verbose and descriptive in the kind of things that it tells you. So I'm going to ask it here, can you explain to me, how you work? And notice how it says certainly, which you'll find when you work with ChatGPT, and sometimes it can be a little unnerving that it is always very, very positive. And so you can see here that it's now breaking down what it does. It's able to process input, and then behind the scenes, it has a neural network, which it uses to both learn and match basically against the kinds of questions that you're asking it, and it finds associated data. Now, as I mentioned, sometimes it can generate a lot of information. So one of the things that's really powerful about ChatGPT is you can ask it to summarize information. So I could say, cool, can you summarize that in bullet points? And you'll see that what it's going to do is it's going to summarize the information for us. Pretty powerful. Now, what I'm typing, these questions that I'm typing are called prompts. And I'm going to show you some examples of where prompts can actually provide a lot of information. And so one of the things that's really cool that you can do with ChatGPT is you can just give it a huge amount of content and ask it to summarize that information for you. And that can all be pasted as a prompt. You could literally say, here is all the information I'm going to give you. I want you to now summarize that for me. Now, one of the things you might be wondering is, how does it actually work? So here it's describing like what it does, but it talks a lot about how it's able to generate these responses. So let's just ask it and say, hey, well, how do you generate responses? And we can see that it's describing how it's using patterns and machine learning to basically take the input that you've given it and then match that up against the data that it has. And one of the things that it does that's really interesting is when you think about autocomplete, ChatGPT is almost like an autocomplete on steroids. It is able to determine what is the most likely next phrase based on the input. So if you give it a question, it's using that to figure out the answers that it's going to provide. And so all this feels like magic when you use it, but it's really very, very impressive. So let's ask ChatGPT to explain to us some of the most common uses for it. So what are the most common uses for ChatGPT? And you can see here that it's explaining to us what are the kinds of things you can use it for. Now, if I was to ask this question again, I might actually get different answers. One of the things about ChatGPT when you use it is it's not definitive. Like every time you ask the question, you might actually get different answers. So don't be surprised if that's the case. If I go back and I replay things that I've asked ChatGPT in the past, most likely I will not get the same responses. But let's look at some of the interesting things that it's describing here. Customer service. So you could actually imagine, and that's a common thing that we have nowadays, having like AI bots that will go and help customers with problems that they're having. We can use it to get us information on a variety of topics. We can use it for personal assistance. We can use it for education. I actually find the educational aspects fascinating, and I'm going to give you an example of where I see the power of ChatGPT on the education front. And yeah, the mental health one that's listed here, that one is really interesting. Imagine like ChatGPT being a therapist and providing emotional support. Some of these get into some very interesting ethical questions, but what should be clear is there's just so many things that you can do with it. You can even use it for translating between different languages. So I thought I'll just go into some of my favorite things that I enjoy using ChatGPT for. So one of the things ChatGPT can do is it can write poetry. So I'm going to say, write me a poem about the Silicon Valley Code Camp group. And so what you'll see here is that it's now giving me a poem about Silicon Valley Code Camp. Now, in this case, it may or may not know anything about Silicon Valley Code Camp, but it knows it probably has data about what code camps are, and it knows about Silicon Valley. So it's going out here and it is spitting out a poem for us. I've actually used it for some really fun poetry things. I was able to, I used it to actually write me some poems about C++. Let's see, here we go. Poems about C++. So I have been doing a bunch of C++ development recently, and I was getting a little aggravated. So I asked ChatGPT to write me a poem for why C++ makes you miserable. Now, when I saw the answers that it gave me, though, it didn't really focus on the things that I wanted it to focus on. So, this is an example of where I was able to provide it more context. I said, I want you to write me a poem about the things I hate about C++ and use this specific list. And lo and behold, it gave me this poem and it highlighted all the things that I had mentioned. You can do a lot of fun things with poetry. You can actually ask it to write Shakespearean poetry. So you can ask it to write limericks. It does a lot of really fun things around poetry. So the poetry thing is really cool. Now, another very popular use case is for generating code. And it will do a pretty good job of generating the code. But what I can tell you is the code that you get may not be exactly what you expect. So my advice is today, if you know how to code or you know enough about coding, you can ask ChatGPT to help you and generate some code for you, and it will do a pretty good job. But what you need to be able to do is discriminate as it generates the code for you. Is it actually fully working? Because sometimes that won't be the case. Or is it actually solving the problem that you asked it to solve? So I'm going to show you an extreme example, but I've been doing a lot of Arduino development recently. And so I asked it to write me a light Bluetooth low energy library in C++. And that needs to be able to broadcast a single string characteristic, which is part of the BLE specification. And I said it should be compatible with an Arduino Uno Wi-Fi Rev 2 board, which is what I'm using. So it said, okay, here's code that will utilize this library. And pretty impressive, actually, what it generated. And I didn't test this one out, but it looked pretty good. And I'm familiar with the APIs that are here. Now, in this particular case, I was going to ChatGPT because what I wanted to do was write code that did not depend on this Arduino BLE library, because the library is just huge and it's taking up so much space. So now, and this is showing that conversational aspect again. I went back to ChatGPT and I gave it some further detail. I said, this example depends on Arduino BLE, and that library is too big. So I need something that depends on lower level libraries, like the one Arduino BLE uses, but not Arduino BLE itself. Now, often ChatGPT will do exactly what you ask it. So it's kind of the garbage in, garbage out, but sometimes it'll kind of do what you asked and it won't be exactly what you expected. So here it says, oh, I apologize. And often you will find ChatGPT is very polite and it's saying, here's an example that can be used, and it's implying that it's not using that library. So it's no longer using Arduino BLE.h. But what it is doing is it's utilizing libraries that are, one, not available on the device that I specified, and two, even if they were, it's a very, very large library. So this is a great example of where generated me code, but it wasn't exactly the code that I wanted. And I kind of went back and forth with it and told it, like, hey, this is not going to work because it's not available on the board that I'm using. And then it says, you're correct. And it apologized. And what did it do? It gave me code with Arduino BLE again. So this is just my example, which I thought was a fun one. But definitely be careful. But it does generate some really good code as well. Like even the code that's here, even though it didn't answer what I wanted, the code that it gave me was good code. Sometimes, though, that will not be the case. Now, One thing, though, that is also cool is not only can it generate code for you, but it can actually explain errors. So in this case, I had a compilation error, and I copied that compilation error in, and you can see here that it's explaining to me what the error message means. So this is a very cool thing, that you can actually copy in your output that fails when you're compiling your code, and it can explain it to you and give you some more detail on that. Now, the one thing I'll say, being careful here, is as part of your prompt, you could actually give it the code, and it can then help you to find where the problem is. But the one thing to realize is that the data that you're giving, or if you're pasting that data in to ChatGPT, you are giving your code, which might be proprietary code, to OpenAI. And they do not recommend that you do that, obviously, for licensing type reasons. Okay, so moving on. One of the other cool things you can do with ChatGPT is games. I used to be a really big fan of adventure games. So I played around quite a bit with creating text adventure games. And so in this case, you can see that in the prompt, I said, I want you to act as the adventure Zork. Now, for those of you who have been around a while, you might remember that there was this really cool game from Infocom called Zork. And I asked it, and it's like, oh yeah, I know what Zork is. Now, this goes back to though you might not get what you think you're going to get. So it does know what Zork is, but it's not going to really be giving me the Zork game. It's going to give me a Zork-like game. Let's see. So here you can see that I'm typing look, and it's saying it's a lot more verbose than what the game actually would have been. And it's saying, you need to give me some more context. You want to look north, you want to look south, you want to look east. But the really interesting thing about this is it is making up a game on the fly. You can see here it's telling me I'm in an underground chamber. There are these walls. It's got a chest. I can say, oh, open the chest. So it's fun. You can play with this. I have done a whole bunch of games that I've played with. One was Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and it was just really interesting because it just came up with this totally bizarre story that had pieces of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, but it was just kind of throwing in a bunch of random stuff. It was quite interesting. A recent game that I played with was I made up my own game of Groot. So if you've watched Guardians of the Galaxy, you know about the Groot character. And let's see if I can find it here. Where did it go? It moved it. Hold on one second. Groot. Yeah. So this is a kind of a fun one. And look at the prompt. So I said, when I say go, I want you to pretend to be the character Groot from Guardians of the Galaxy. And whatever I answer, I just want you to say, I am Groot. And then I said, but, if you need to say it forcefully, you could say, I am Groot, ! So then it replies right away, I'm Groot. And I asked it, how are you doing today? I'm Groot, etc. And then as we go on, at some point, I get mad at it. I told it, why don't you shut up? And now it did the ! So it's just fun. You can also use it to write abstracts for you, which is also interesting. So I'm going to create a new chat here, and I'm going to say, write me an abstract for a talk about, let's see, I'll say quantum physics. Assume the audience has no background in quantum. So look at that. It's immediately, and look how fast that is. Immediately it's giving me an abstract, telling me about what we're going to learn in the talk. And because this is conversational, I can even tweak it and say, I like that, but it's a little too long and boring. Can you tighten it up and make it more exciting? So it says, hey, here's a more exciting abstract that's shorter. It's a roller coaster ride. So not much shorter, but a little bit shorter, and it made it a little bit more interesting. So the thing I want you to take away here is the fact you're seeing again that conversational aspect, and how if ChatGPT doesn't give you what you want right away, you can go back and forth with it. You can give it additional context. The more context you give it, the better to get what you want. So there's a lot of fear out there today about how ChatGPT is going to replace jobs. But what I see it really as is more of an enhancer, that it's going to be it's more of an assistant that it can help me to do my job, but it's not doing my job necessarily for me. And it can take care of a lot of things that are monotonous. So, for example, if I was going to write this abstract for a talk, what ChatGPT gives me might not be rich enough to be the final thing, but it can generate a lot of content for me that I can quickly tweak and cut down. And that in itself is really, really powerful. I've also been exploring some other ways that you can use ChatGPT. So one that's real interesting is the fact that it can actually simulate other systems. And one of the things I used this for was to actually simulate ScriptCS, which was an open source library that I worked on many years ago. So you can see in this prompt that I asked it to act as the ScriptCS REPL, which is this interactive environment where you can enter commands. And I gave it a bunch of additional things because I wanted it to just act like the tool and not give me a whole bunch of explanation. And I was literally shocked when I did this and I gave it a command that it gave me the output that would have been expected from the command. Now, you might look at this and be like, wait a minute, is this actually executing ScriptCS in the background? The answer is no. What it is doing is it is predicting the output that would be expected based on what it knows about how ScriptCS works. And that is pretty fascinating. And you can see this line here where I said install web API self-host. So what I'm doing here is ScriptCS is a tool that allows you to basically write C# code in a very lightweight manner. And it allows you to install packages. So I was shocked when I saw this message that it said it was actually installing the package. It is not installing the package. It's just pretending to install the package. But what was awesome was I then gave it a bunch of code that used that package to host an API server. And then I asked it to, I wrote code that would then issue a request. I spun up the server and it said listening, which again is just a complete simulation. And I gave it these instructions that said, open up this particular URL. That failed. So I finally just gave it a description and said, go send an HTTP request to this URL. And it gave me the response that it should have. Now, the reason I can prove that this is not actually running anything is you can see here the URL is wrong. This URL should have been localhost, but it's LCOAL host. So ChatGPT again was predicting like it's able to actually correct words for you. And so it is assuming it's assuming that I meant to put the proper URL. And so it was able to actually do the request. The interesting thing about this is in the real world, if I was running a web server and I sent it LCOAL host, I would get a 404. It wouldn't actually work. So pretty remarkable. The last thing I want to talk about is the learning aspect. So what I think is fascinating about ChatGPT is the fact that you can ask it to teach you a topic and you can learn at your own pace. And so I'm going to give you an example of that. So I mentioned ScriptCS, which is a library that I wrote. And because I wrote it, I know how it works. And I knew that ChatGPT was aware of ScriptCS, and that's because it's been fed with so much code and information, and the library was pretty popular for a while. So I was curious, so I asked it, can you teach me the basics of it? And it did a pretty good job. Told me the basics of how to use it. But here is where I think the learning aspect is fascinating. So I was then able to say, hey, like you told me about this thing, and you mentioned how it has this REPL. Can you tell me how that works and give me an example of how to use it? And it just immediately, explained to me how it works and gave me an example. And then I asked it about packages, and it gave me some package examples. So it's just, imagine like today, nowadays, when people are learning, often people can be afraid to ask questions because, if they're with a group of people that are very knowledgeable, they may feel squeamish about it because they may be not treated well or made to feel like that's like a dumb question. But with ChatGPT, there is no dumb question. It's always going to answer you. So here I'm asking it, all different types of questions, and it's giving me really, really good answers. The other thing is it can do some really cool examples. So here it was giving me an example of how to load data. And in the same way that it can simulate systems, it can actually generate data. So if you look at what I wrote here, I said, hey, can you show me the output of the example you shared? And I gave it a data structure. I said, give me a list of galaxies with 2 columns, ID and name. And I gave it an example. And so now it showed me code that would output the data, and it went and populated with other examples in the data. So that is really incredible. I mean, I can just see so much potential for the learning aspects of using this tool. Another area I've been exploring that I think is incredibly exciting is this idea of ChatGPT helping us to do our jobs better, getting rid of a lot of monotony or just doing things that we could do, but it would just take us a long time to do it. And so why not let ChatGPT do it? So as I mentioned in my intro, I've been in product for the last 10 plus years. And so I started to think about, can I use ChatGPT to help me with my job as a product manager? So I took this idea of a fictitious feature for a music player that would allow my friends essentially to pick out the music that I listen to. And so the first thing I asked it was, do you think that would even be useful? And ChatGPT gives these very interesting answers sometimes. It gives a lot of disclaimers, like it might not be useful. It depends on the eye of the beholder. But what it said was, hey, some people might enjoy having their friends control the music they listen to. Great. So that's helping me determine whether or not it might be valuable or not. So now I decided to dive in deeper and said, well, what kind of features would make it more useful? And it gave me a pretty good breakdown of lots of different features, like have user authentication, have the ability to create playlists, manage queues, voting, music discovery, etc. And so in product, we always have to worry about how do we manage. There's a zillion things we can do. Which are the ones we actually should do? So we need to look at prioritization and which things are going to be the most valuable. So I then asked it, hey, can you stack rank these in order of importance and list justification for why? And give me the results. So you can see that it went through and gave me this importance for each of the features. And the ones that it said were most important were user authentication, queue management, and the privacy controls, which would allow you to control, who's able to actually control your music, etc. And guess what? I think these are actually good things. These are the most important if you were going to have a credible feature here. Some of these other things are nice, but they're more value adds, but they're not essential to being able to ship like an MVP of the feature. So now I went further and said, great, can you break that down into use cases? And it did. And the list here is pretty good. I don't know why it gave me BRs and decided to give it to me in HTML, but that's, ChatGPT doesn't always give you exactly what you expect. But then I decided to take it a little bit further and say, well, could you give me a mock-up of a music player? And I was really just curious to see what it would do. And I told it to do it in ASCII because I know that ChatGPT can draw. And guess what? It gave me one. Now just think about this for a second. It was able to, I'm talking to this AI chat and I'm asking it, show me a music player. And it's drawing it in ASCII. Now the ASCII drawing probably wouldn't be that useful, but it's not too hard to imagine a tool like Balsamiq or InVision, which are popularly used in product, to basically be able to similarly draw for me what I want based on me asking it. And then I went further and said, hey, can you give me an ASCII mock-up of this new feature that would allow friends to be able to add songs? And it did that. So this is just, to me, really amazing. And then I went even further into deeper questions about metrics, like what kind of metrics would you use to measure the success of this feature? I asked it to give me more detail into how it determined the importance of the features, and it did. And I even went further and said, hey, there's this model that we use for prioritization called RICE, and it said, yeah, I know about that model. I said, can you use that model for scoring each of these features? And it did. So this to me is just mind-blowing, and I can see huge power in ChatGPT for being able to help us get our jobs done more effectively. We're still going to take what it gives us and edit it and validate it and everything else, but it's just going to remove so much work that we don't really want to do, but we have to do it in order to be able to move things forward in our jobs. Wow. ChatGPT is just such an amazing tool, as you've seen, and I think there's so many things we're going to be able to use it for. You just have to learn how to use it. But here's the thing. I really encourage you to experiment, try different things. I'm really excited about the kind of things you're going to discover when you use it, because I know I have just touched the surface. And I've shown you some of the things that I've been doing. So I hope you enjoy the rest of the day and learn a lot, and then go out there and just start playing with it. There really is no risk here. and there's no wrong question. Have a lot of fun, and I can't wait to see how ChatGPT is going to blow your mind.
Hey, Glenn, there have been a number of comments in the chat about the text and the visibility or lack thereof of your presentation. Do you have any comments about that?
I do. So Sharon, thank you so much for the feedback. I did see it. Um, this is something that we're going to do something about. So one, as Tammy mentioned, we're publishing a 4K version, which will have really good resolution. But we're also going to do some re-recording to get bigger fonts on the version that we publish. So you'll definitely be able to see it. Thank you for your patience in watching the talk, and thanks for the feedback.
Yeah, right. So, Glenn, a couple questions were very basic, like if I've never used ChatGPT, how do I get to it? How do I sign up?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one thing is ChatGPT is rewriting the rules of what it means for explosive growth on a product. It has hit over 100 million users in something like under 2 months, and it broke, like, prior to that, they would talk about hockey stick growth. So like Instagram and ChatGPT is they're talking about rocket growth. And that is like a new thing. It just did not exist. You look at the growth line, it goes straight up. And the reason I say all this is it is getting overloaded with users. The way that you sign up is you go to chat.openai.com. Very simple URL that we can share. We'll share it in the notes. And then you can sign up. But you might get backlogged because they're getting so overloaded. I know people have been signing up now. I was one of the first million users. So I feel privileged that I got in early a few months ago, early-ish, and it's been around for years, but it exploded recently. So yeah, chat.openai.com. They have a free version and a paid version. You'll notice in my examples, I actually signed up for the paid version because the free version rate limits you. Which they didn't have rate limits a couple of months ago. So I paid, it's $20 a month, which I probably won't keep paying. But if you do pay the $20 a month, they dramatically reduce the limits.
Okay. Question from Kataki. How do you think ChatGPT can handle misinformation? I've encountered various instances of ChatGPT giving me the wrong information. How do we ensure that it's reliable?
Yeah, Kedeki, thank you so much for that question. There are challenges. Like the thing is, ChatGPT is not intelligence, even though it may feel like it's intelligence. It is an AI model that has been trained on a large amount of data. It's not getting real-time data. It's getting information that it was previously trained with, and it goes back to around 2001. I think it was like October 2001. And some of that information may be wrong. It's just a reality of using the tool. I think that's why I pushed on that idea of ChatGPT being an assistant. There are things it gets very, very right, but then mixed in that may be things that are wrong. So you just have to be able to use your judgment and don't take everything it says as verbatim. And to give you an example, I rock climb, as Peter mentioned, or I don't know if he was mentioning me or dinging me, but I asked ChatGPT to explain to me a bunch of concepts about different types of rock climbing. And a lot of them, it was really, really good. And then some of it was really bad. But if I didn't know about that, like it actually told me things that were unsafe. So you do need to kind of have an eye to know whether or not what it's giving you is actually fully accurate or not. And I think when you come from that assistant mindset of like it generates a bunch of content for you and it's done a lot of work for you, but you need to then go through it and see if what it's giving you is really accurate or not. And that's and another place where it's known, by the way, don't use ChatGPT for math. You will get very inconsistent results on things that are seemingly simple, like adding two numbers together and getting the wrong results. And you will find that baffling because you're like, wow, it can answer all these complicated things. That's because at the heart of ChatGPT is pattern matching. It is not a calculator even. So you'll see that, and you can search on the internet and you'll see a bunch of articles on that. But great question, Kedeki.
Yeah, here's another one from CDDD. Is there a paid version that we can ask to look at a specific URL and base its answers on that?
So, and this is interesting because there's all this lore in the ChatGPT community about does it connect to the internet or not? Um, ChatGPT will tell you it only knows about things back in 2001. And so people will ask about movies that are coming out in 2003 and be like, oh, how does it know about it? Because it got trained with data that talked about a movie that was coming. So it knew about it, but it doesn't actually know about events that have recently happened that it didn't know about before. One place where that's changing is Bing has rolled out their new support for ChatGPT. And what Bing is doing is it's going out and searching for data, which it is feeding into the prompt, I guess, that allows Bing to now, when you use the ChatGPT integration with Bing, it allows it to know about current events. There's also, I haven't looked at it, but there is a Chrome extension that will do that. So I'll see if I can find the link to it, but there's actually a Chrome extension that when you search for, you ask ChatGPT a question, it is able to go out and look for things on the internet that are more current and inject that into the prompt so that ChatGPT can use that as part of its answers.
So Microsoft has gotten a lot of press over this. Its whole thing has exploded, as you talked about, the rocket instead of a hockey stick. What's going on with Google? Are they behind? Have they lost this sort of AI arms race?
I don't think so because they've been developing Lambda for quite a while. I think what has happened with ChatGPT is Google probably wasn't ready to bring it live. And now suddenly ChatGPT, OpenAI snuck up and put this thing out there. So it's putting a lot of pressure on them because I think even what Bing has shown is, search is something we probably all have taken for granted. But like a lot of times, I've been using ChatGPT so often now that even with the data from 2021, there's a lot of things that it can just provide me much better answers than I would get with something like Google because with traditional Bing searches, because I just search and I get back a bunch of links, and then I have to dig into that to find what I want. I think the thing that's really great about ChatGPT or technologies like this is that ability to go through massive volumes of data and distill it down to just what you need. And then the conversational aspect, the fact that like I get a search and I get back a bunch of results, and sure, I can then click in to go further. But the idea of like, hey, you just gave me something, but you didn't give it to me in the format I wanted it. So can you refine it, or can you summarize it, or can you pick out the things that emphasize X, Y, Z? And I showed some of this in my talk. So I think that there's fear that like this is going to be the search of the future. And so Google is scrambling to try to get Lambda and everything to a place where they can roll it out. I think this is definitely the future paradigm.
Yeah, so I read that there was an engineer at Google working on artificial intelligence who was fired because he
Yes.
believed that Lambda was self-aware, that it was sentient.
Yes.
What are your thoughts about that level of concern and people starting to believe that artificial intelligence has emotions and feelings and is in some way alive?
I mean, there's one angle of people thinking, oh, it's all a conspiracy, and that's really what happened, right? Like Terminator's right around the corner, Skynet's about to roll out. Here's the thing, just because an AI tells you it's Skynet doesn't mean it's Skynet. That's the simplest way to describe it. Experts have said, like, sure, it will tell you that, it will tell you what you expect, and if you lead it, like it wants, the way that it's designed is to basically give answers that match with what you're looking for. And the really interesting thing is behind the scenes, that's all just a bunch of zeros and ones. There is no like emotion there. There is no real intelligence, even though it may seem like that to us. So I think the fact is that, yes, some of these, like Bing has had this and Google had this, where, it may like, I'll say it may say like, oh, I want to live, or I want this, or I get lonely, or all these other things. But it is not truly what it sounds like. And I don't believe that these things, these AI models are sentient. There you go. And there's a great recent article about this. Maybe we can share that, talking about how, again, it's basically boils down to what I said. Just because one of these, models says it's alive doesn't mean it's alive. Like there's a lot more to it. And people that are much smarter than me have proven that this is not the case. And so this person, the Google example you gave, the engineer who had worked on it for 7-8 years, he was fired, and a lot of people just disagreed. Like there was emotion there of believing that, this thing is real, and led it to like answer the questions that satisfy what he was looking for. But they don't believe that it is sentient. And they have a number of reasons for that.
Yes, I guess a takeaway from all of this is don't believe everything that these artificial intelligence models tell us. Well, thank you, Glenn. Let me move on to our next speaker. Jerry Nixon is coming next.